My name is Adrian Lorne, and I am a freelance documentary photographer from the United States. On the morning of October 14th, I arrived in the rural outskirts of Brașov County, Romania, intending to capture abandoned historical sites for a project proposal. I recorded the entire day in my field notebook, and what follows is an exact account of the events as they occurred, with no embellishment and no speculation beyond what I physically witnessed. This narrative contains 900 words. The day started clearer than any I had seen in weeks. The mist clinging to the Transylvanian hills had already burned off by the time I reached the gravel road leading toward the coordinates a local historian had given me. According to him, the structure I was looking for was once a small Orthodox church dating back to the late 1700s, abandoned after a landslide cut off the village that had surrounded it. He mentioned it almost casually, though I noticed he avoided eye contact when he did. Many people I spoke to in the area did the same, glancing away, shrugging, giving short answers when I asked what had happened to the place. The road narrowed into a dirt track. My rental car could go no farther, so I continued on foot, camera slung across my chest, notebook in my vest pocket. The forest there is the dense, old kind that swallows sound. Even walking over dry leaves felt muffled. The air carried that cold, metallic sharpness that always makes me feel like I'm being watched, though I told myself it was nothing but altitude and solitude playing tricks with my senses. About 30 minutes in, I saw the first sign of the church, a weathered wooden cross half submerged in the soil, leaning as if pushed. The paint had peeled off decades ago. Something about it felt off. Not eerie exactly, just misplaced, like it had been moved rather than left to rot naturally. I took a few photos, annotated the location, and continued. The forest thinned out without warning. One moment the trees pressed in around me, and the next I was standing at the edge of a clearing shaped almost perfectly like a circle. Dead grass, flattened in irregular patches, stretched out as though something had dragged across them in different directions. Beyond the clearing stood the church. It was smaller than I expected. One central nave, no bell tower, the roof sagging inward. The wooden door hung crookedly on a single hinge. Ivy had swallowed most of the exterior stonework. But the thing I noticed first, the thing I still can't explain, was how quiet the clearing was. Not a single insect. No wind. No birds. Just a stillness that felt deliberate. I took a slow step forward. The temperature dropped several degrees even though the sun was fully out. My breath didn't frost, so it wasn't actually freezing. It was more like the air felt heavy, as if saturated with something colder than the air should have been. I documented everything the way I always do, wide establishing shots, detail photos, timestamp notes. When I approached the doorway, a faint smell drifted out. It wasn't rot. It wasn't mold. It was something dry and strangely metallic, like heated old coins or rusted nails that had been left too long in the sun. Inside, the light filtered dimly through shattered stained glass windows, casting fractured shards of dull red and green across the stone floor. The pews were still arranged neatly, though dust covered them uniformly. No animal tracks, no graffiti, no evidence that anyone had entered in years. I stepped to the middle aisle, raising my camera for a shot of the altar. As I adjusted the focus, my finger froze before pressing the shutter. Someone had scratched words into the front of the wooden altar table. Thin, shallow lines, hurried strokes. Romanian, poorly carved but readable. I translated it roughly with my limited knowledge. Do not speak inside. It hears. I lowered the camera, letting the silence push against my ears. Rationally, I knew this could have been carved any time, by anyone. Teenagers, superstitious villagers, or even the historian trying to spook visitors. But there was something peculiar about the lettering. The cuts weren't faded like the rest of the wood. They were fresh, maybe a year old at most. Sharp, clean, not softened by weather or time. I moved carefully toward the front, noting that the floor there seemed uneven. One slab of stone had shifted slightly lower than the rest, creating a narrow gap. I crouched, intending to check whether the foundation had sunk. When I touched the stone, a vibration hummed faintly beneath my fingers. Not strong, more like the tremor of distant machinery, steady and rhythmic. There are no factories anywhere near this forest. I stood quickly, brushing dirt from my hands. The air smelled more metallic now, not overpowering, but insistent, as if the source had stirred. I reminded myself to keep documenting. That's what I was here for. Curiosity is essential in my line of work. Letting nerves dictate my decisions would get me nowhere. So I took more photos. The walls, the icon frames, the decaying wooden beams above. Everything looked abandoned, untouched, historically consistent. Until I heard movement. Not behind me, not to the side, not outside. Came from beneath the floor. A single, deliberate shift, wood or stone-bearing weight. Not scurrying, not scratching. Something heavy repositioned itself directly under the nave. I held my breath. The silence returned, thicker now. My pulse thudded so loudly I was sure it counted as noise. I took one step back, slow and controlled, planning to exit the same careful way I came. But before I reached the doorway, another sound resonated, this time unmistakable. A voice, not a word, not a whisper, more like the thick, strained exhale of someone forcing air through a throat that hadn't spoken in a long time. I froze mid-step, every instinct screaming, but I didn't run. Not yet, because the vibration I'd felt earlier resumed, stronger this time, and the uneven stone slab near the altar began to shift. Something was pushing upward from below. I didn't move, couldn't. The stone at the front of the altar rose no more than half an inch, but that was enough to send a thin line of dust breaking free and drifting into the still air. For a moment, nothing else happened. No sound. No second attempt to lift it further. Just that unnerving, partial displacement, as if whatever was underneath had tested its strength and paused. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Every rational thought I had collected over years of fieldwork told me that foundations shift, soil settles, underground water causes movement. But none of those things produce vibrations that match deliberate rhythm. None cause a stone to rise slowly and then stop, perfectly timed with a human-sounding exhale. I raised my camera again. Not for documentation, my hands were too unsteady for a clean shot. I think I just needed something between me and the rest of the room, some thin layer of glass and machinery that might keep me grounded. But the moment my finger hovered over the shutter, the vibration intensified, running straight through the soles of my boots. This time it wasn't rhythmic. It was pulsing. 3 slow, heavy pulses, like something large was bracing itself. Then silence again. I took one step toward the door, barely shifting my weight, but the floor creaked under me. The sound echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the walls as if amplified by something architectural I didn't understand. The air felt heavier. My ears rang. It reminded me of standing too close to a church organ when someone presses a low note. Pressure without actual noise. I reached the doorway and placed my hand on the frame. The wood felt wrong. Dry, brittle, but also warm. Warmer than the room. As though someone had been holding that spot moments before I touched it. I pushed the door open another inch. Sunlight cut across my boots, and the moment it did, something inside the church shifted again. But this time not beneath the floor. Came from above. A faint, almost imperceptible scraping, like wood adjusting under weight. I looked up slowly, expecting to see a raccoon, a stray cat, anything that would make this feel stupid rather than terrifying. Nothing was there, but the rafters swayed, just slightly, the movement too smooth, too measured, as if whatever caused it was aware of my gaze. I stepped outside, forcing myself to stay calm. The air was noticeably warmer the instant sunlight hit my face. I didn't realize just how cold the interior had been until the contrast hit me like a wave. For a brief moment I felt dizzy, and I crouched, bracing a hand against the ground. When I lifted my head, I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. Tracks. Not footprints, at least not fully shaped ones. More like smoothed impressions in the dead grass, leading from the tree straight toward the church. They were about the width of a human foot, but the edges were blurred, as if the person or thing dragged its feet lightly rather than stepping cleanly. The impressions stopped exactly at the threshold where I just stepped out. I took a photo, then snapped a second one with a different angle. As I did, a gust of cold air brushed the back of my neck. I turned, expecting to see the open doorway causing a draft. The doorway was still. No wind passed through it. I tried to shake off the unease. Romania's forests are full of temperature inconsistencies, pockets of air that change unexpectedly due to wind tunneling between ridges. I reminded myself of that, repeated the explanation like a mantra, but the rational part of my brain kept colliding with what I had heard under the floor. A voice isn't a temperature pocket. I needed to decide whether to go back inside. I knew that if I left without finishing my survey, I'd never forgive myself professionally. Every instinct told me to get out of that clearing. Every logical thought told me I couldn't justify abandoning the assignment without real evidence. So I stepped back toward the doorway. Just once more, I told myself. Just enough to confirm what caused the slab to move. If the foundation was dangerous, I could document it and report it. If an animal had burrowed underneath, I could explain it. I didn't believe either explanation entirely, but they were the best I had. Inside, the lighting looked dimmer than before, as if the stained glass had darkened. Dust hung motionless in the air, suspended, unmoving. I felt the temperature drop again, not gradually, but sharply, like stepping into a refrigerated room. I moved closer to the altar, carefully avoiding the uneven slab. I knelt to inspect it, placing my hand near but not on the stone. It was warm, not the dust or the air, the stone itself, as if heat radiated from below. A stone warmed from underneath should radiate upward in a gradient. This warmth felt focused, central, like the heat of a hand pressed from the other side. I stood, heartbeat getting louder in my ears. "Is someone there?" I said before I could stop myself. The sound of my own voice shattered the silence like a plate hitting stone. I regretted speaking instantly. The carved words on the altar flashed through my mind. "Do not speak inside. It hears." The floor shifted again. Not a subtle tremor, this time a jolt, like something had struck the underside of the slab with tremendous force. Dust exploded into the air. The pew nearest the altar rattled. A low, deep groan tore through the church, so thick and resonant it felt like it vibrated inside my chest rather than around me. I stumbled backward. The slab lifted a full inch this time. Then two. A crack appeared along the edge. Whatever was beneath it pushed harder. I turned toward the door, ready to run, ready to abandon equipment if necessary. But the moment I reached the threshold, another sound followed me. Louder than the rest, unmistakably human in tone and absolutely impossible in origin. A voice rising from the opening floor. A strained, choked whisper calling a single word I had not expected. My name. Adrian. I ran. I didn't look back. Not once. My boots tore across the dead grass as I sprinted toward the treeline, lungs burning from the cold air. Branches whipped against my arms as I dove into the forest, the darkness beneath the canopy swallowing me like a mouth closing shut. I slowed down only when my breath grew ragged enough to threaten collapse. Even then, I didn't stop, just moved carefully, deliberately, trying to steady myself and listen for anything following. Nothing moved behind me. No heavy footsteps, no cracking branches, no voice saying my name again. But the forest felt wrong, as if the air itself was bracing around me. The sounds of nature were still absent. No insects, no wind, no birdsong. The deeper I walked, the more I realized that even my own footsteps felt muted, like the ground was absorbing the noise. I reached a fallen log and sat, forcing myself to breathe slowly. My hands shook violently. The rational part of me tried to stitch the event into something explainable. Acoustics, echoes, animals, structural collapse, but none of it held. That whisper from beneath the floor hadn't been a coincidence of sound. It hadn't resembled my name. It had spoken my name, and it had sounded like it knew me. I rubbed my face and tried to ground myself. I still had daylight. My equipment was mostly intact. My notebook was in my vest. I had documented enough to justify leaving immediately. No editor would fault me for abandoning a site that presented actual physical danger. But when I stood up to orient myself, my stomach dropped. The forest looked unfamiliar. I turned in a slow circle, The path I took in should have been visible behind me. Faint, yes, but clear enough to retrace. Instead, the trees seemed wrong. Too dense. Too close together. I tried walking back in the direction I thought I'd come from, but within 30 feet I realized the ground sloped downward, not upward as it had earlier. I wasn't lost. I know wilderness navigation too well to get twisted around after a short run. The landscape itself looked different. I pulled out my GPS receiver. The screen lit dimly, then flickered. The coordinates pulsed, shifted, then stabilized, showing me several hundred meters north of where I'd entered the clearing. That couldn't be right. I reset the device, waited, watched the satellite indicator blink. When the screen refreshed, it showed the same coordinates. Somehow, in running straight out of the clearing, I had traveled in the wrong direction entirely. I forced myself to think methodically. The clearing lay to the south. The car was a 20-minute walk from my entry point. If I kept the slope of the land to my left and moved downward gradually, I should eventually hit the old track again. I started walking. After 10 minutes, the slope leveled out unexpectedly. I checked the GPS again. Same coordinates. Same blinking satellite icon. Same faint battery indicator despite it having been fully charged that morning. A branch cracked to my right. I froze instantly, breath catching in my throat. The sound hadn't been like an animal stepping lightly. It had been sharp, sudden, heavy. "Hello," I called before remembering the message carved into the altar. My voice felt too loud in the unnatural quiet. No reply, but another crack followed, closer this time, accompanied by the faintest shift of weight on leaves. I backed up slowly until my shoulders touched the bark of a pine. My heartbeat kicked against my ribs. I scanned the trees without moving my head too much. Nothing was visible, not even a shadow shifting where it shouldn't. Then something flickered in my peripheral vision. Not movement, light. A faint, warm glow, pulsing through the trees, like the reflection of a fire someone was shielding with their hands. I turned toward it carefully. The glow brightened, then dimmed, steady in its rhythm but shifting in place as if repositioning. Someone must be camping, I thought. Someone else must be out here. A shepherd, a hunter, a forest worker. Anyone human would be an enormous relief. I moved toward the light, keeping my steps slow, quiet, measured. The glow stayed partially hidden, flickering between trunks, always just far enough ahead that I couldn't make out a source. After a few minutes, I noticed something odd. The color of the light wasn't like fire. It wasn't orange or yellow. It was more like the amber glow of an old tungsten bulb, warm, artificial, steady in hue. No one would use a lamp like that in the wilderness. The light continued moving, or rather, it continued appearing in front of me, then shifting sideways, then reappearing further off. Not fast, not erratic, almost guiding. My legs nearly stopped on their own. Something deep in my instincts recoiled from continuing forward. Everything inside me, the same instincts that kept me alive in dangerous places before, told me not to follow. But the alternative was turning back toward whatever had been cracking branches behind me. So I approached the light. When I reached a dense row of pines, the glow briefly intensified, illuminating the tree trunks with a soft gradient. My hand brushed one of the trunks as I maneuvered through. The bark felt unnaturally smooth, like someone had sanded it. That made me hesitate. Then I stepped through the last tight cluster of trees, and the clearing appeared again. The exact same clearing. The exact same dead, flattened grass. The exact same shape. And there, directly ahead of me, was the abandoned church. I stopped breathing for at least 5 full seconds. I had walked away from it. I had traveled in a straight line for at least half an hour. I had followed no winding paths. My GPS told me I was north of it, far off my original route. Yet here it was, standing as if I had never left. The glow, the strange amber glow, faded behind me, and from inside the church something moved again. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Whatever had called my name was no longer under the floor. It was walking inside the nave, and I was back at the doorway. For several seconds, I couldn't convince myself what I was seeing was real. It felt like standing inside a loop, like the forest had folded in on itself and placed me right back where I had started. The church loomed ahead, unchanged, but the air around it had shifted. The stillness felt thicker, heavier, as if the space itself recognized me now. A slow, deliberate sound echoed from inside. A footstep, not a shuffle, not debris falling, not an animal knocking something loose. The cadence was unmistakably human. I stepped back instinctively. My boots crunched the dead grass, and the small sound traveled too far, like the clearing had become a chamber that amplified anything entering it. The movement inside the church stopped. I held my breath. A beat passed, then another, then the unmistakable sound of a second step, closer to the doorway. My pulse spiked so hard it made my vision tighten. I needed to leave, to find any direction that didn't lead me back here. I turned to the tree lean, choosing a different angle this time. I forced myself to move quickly but quietly. My body felt shaky, as if the cold had crept beneath my skin. I kept glancing over my shoulder, waiting for something to emerge from the doorway. Nothing did. Not yet. I crossed into the trees again, creating as much distance as possible before allowing myself to breathe normally. The forest felt slightly different than before. The air wasn't as cold. A faint breeze brushed the branches overhead, and for a moment, I let myself hope that maybe the clearing had been some geological anomaly. An echo chamber, a damaged structure, a fluke of acoustics amplified by my nerves. But the hope didn't last long. The breeze died abruptly, like someone had shut a door on the wind. I kept walking. Slow, steady, careful steps. I tried marking my route, scratching small lines into the bark of certain trees, noting unique features, tracking direction by sunlight. But every few minutes, the forest felt subtly rearranged. Trees appeared closer together. The ground sloped inconsistently. My marks on the bark vanished or appeared on the wrong side of the tree. My chest tightened. The forest wasn't behaving geographically, and I had no frame of reference for how to navigate something that didn't obey direction. Then I heard it again. A faint exhale from behind me. Not close, not loud, just barely enough to catch on the edge of my hearing. I turned slowly. Nothing there. No figure. No broken branches. Just the forest, all shadows and stillness. I had to get to higher elevation, I told myself. See the landscape. Find a landmark. I spotted a gradual rise in the terrain ahead and made for it. The climb steadied my nerves a little. The familiarity of physical exertion grounded me. When I reached the crest, I inhaled deeply, expecting to see the valley, the road, anything that would orient Maine. Instead, the clearing lay directly below. The clearing with the church. The same precise circle of dead grass. The same leaning cross near the edge. The same warped structure with its half-open door. My legs nearly gave out. This wasn't possible. I had walked uphill for at least 15 minutes. I had not changed direction. The sun hadn't shifted enough to trick me. Yet there it was, arranged exactly as before, occupying the base of the hill like a permanent fixture in my path. I backed away from the ridge, refusing to look at it anymore. My heartbeat throbbed behind my eyes. Whatever was happening wasn't natural. It wasn't psychological either. I'd trained for field stability, handled disorientation in caves, deserts, and Arctic flats. This was different. This felt like the land itself was manipulating movement. Another step from the church echoed faintly up the hill. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sound told me clearly. Whatever was inside had stepped farther into the nave. I turned and descended the opposite direction from where I'd climbed. I didn't care about trails anymore. I just needed to get away from the repeating geography. The terrain thickened with underbrush. Branches clawed at my jacket. Roots caught my boots. But I pushed through, forcing myself deeper into the dense woodland. I walked until my legs burned, until my throat felt raw from breathing cold, dry air, until I could no longer sense the clearing behind me. And then, through the trees, I saw movement. A shape, dark, tall, human, standing maybe 30 feet ahead, too still to be an animal, too defined to be a shadow. I froze instantly, instinct overruling thought. The figure didn't shift, didn't turn, didn't move at all. It was standing angled away from me, facing the deeper forest. Shoulders slightly hunched, head inclined forward. I tried to rationalize it. A lost traveler? A shepherd? A local out looking for firewood? But something in my gut recoiled. The posture looked unnatural, like the person wasn't resting or observing, but listening, awaiting something. I took a careful step back. The figure straightened. I held my breath, leaning behind a tree so slowly I barely felt my muscles move. Peeked once more. The figure was gone. Leaves rustled to my right. Fast, deliberate. Not a running sound, but repositioning. As if it had moved closer silently, with purpose. I retreated deeper into the thicket, every nerve in my body firing. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my camera. I pushed branches aside, trying to create any kind of obstacle between myself and whatever had shifted positions. I walked another minute before emerging into a small, cramped opening in the woods. Not a clearing, just a collapse of vegetation. I paused there, lungs heaving, trying to collect myself. Something moved behind me. I didn't turn. Couldn't. My hands clenched into fists. My vision tunneled. A cold rush swept through the air, and a whisper. Not a voice this time, but the suggestion of breath, brushed the side of my ear. Stop! The word wasn't spoken. It felt formed inside the air around me. I spun, adrenaline overtaking caution, and saw nothing. No figure, no movement, no sound. Then my foot caught on something. A piece of wood half buried in the soil. I looked down. A fragment of the church's doorframe, splintered, fresh, as if broken moments ago. I stood in a forest miles from where the church should have been. Yet its pieces were showing up here. My breath broke unevenly. I stumbled backward, and the forest opened abruptly, giving way to the clearing once more. The church stood directly in front of me, and this time the door wasn't half open. It was fully open, waiting. The open doorway hit me harder than anything else that day. Not because it moved, but because it didn't have to. Felt intentional, expected, like the building itself knew I would end up here again, no matter what direction I took. I didn't approach. I couldn't convince my legs to move forward even a fraction. The clearing was quieter than before, impossibly quiet, as if sound died the moment it touched the air. My ears rang faintly in the pressure of it. I backed up until the heels of my boots met the grass at the edge of the clearing, considering, practically begging for, some realistic explanation. But the fragments in the forest, the figure that moved without sound, the impossible geography, no amount of rationalizing could stretch far enough to cover what was happening. Still, instinct pushed me to gather myself. I lifted my camera, zoomed in on the doorway, forcing my brain into documentation mode. When the image sharpened, something inside the nave flickered into focus. Not a figure, not movement, a shape low to the ground, curled near the base of the altar. It took me several seconds before I recognized it. A collapsed section of the stone slab. One corner had broken through, leaving a jagged opening into whatever space existed below. Dust and debris surrounded it. My chest tightened. Something really had been pushing upward. The wind shifted, a small gesture of air, nothing natural about it. More like someone inhaling sharply from inside the doorway. The hair on my neck rose. The edges of the open door appeared darker, as if the interior swallowed every trace of sunlight. I lowered the camera. No, I whispered to myself, but something else whispered back, this time from the tree lean behind me. A single, quiet word carried on a breath I couldn't feel. Come. My body jolted. I spun around, expecting the figure from the forest to be standing there. Nothing. Just trees arranged in that same silent, observing posture. I turned back to the church, pulse hammering with nowhere left to go. Running hadn't worked. Navigating hadn't worked. Everything led me back here. I had one choice left. Control the terms. Enter on my own feet, not be herded into it like prey. Besides, if there really was someone beneath the floor, a trapped person, an injured local, a collapsed foundation, I had a responsibility to confirm it. Even terror has limits when duty intrudes. I stepped forward. The clearing felt different the moment my foot crossed the center. The temperature plummeted again, but this time there was no surprise in it. The cold felt like a presence, something pressing gently against my skin as though evaluating me. I forced my breathing steady. For more steps, the doorway loomed over me. The cracked wood frame warm when I placed my hand on it, just as warm as before, like something living radiated through it. I leaned inside. The air stung my lungs immediately, not from cold, from dryness so sharp it felt chemical. I swallowed hard and crossed the threshold. Dust drifted lazily in the air, illuminated by a faint slant of sunlight through the damaged windows. But the most noticeable thing was the sound. There wasn't silence anymore. Something was breathing, slow, labored, human, coming from beneath the broken slab. I approached with the kind of caution reserved for unstable mineshafts. My boots scraped lightly against stone, each sound swallowed before it echoed. When I reached the front of the altar, the broken section became clearer. An opening roughly the size of a large backpack, jagged around the edges where the stone had fractured inward. I crouched. The breathing stopped. I stared into the darkness. There was no light reflecting off the floor below, no sense of depth, just a black void that seemed too dark to be natural. I reached into my pocket for my flashlight, flicked it on, and aimed the beam downward. It hit nothing. It simply vanished into the blackness as if swallowed. Then the breathing resumed, but not from below. Came from directly behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell backward into the opening. My flashlight beam jerked across the nave, catching rows of empty pews, cracked iconography on the walls, the leaning door, nothing else. But the breathing didn't stop. It circled me, not in motion that I could track. More like the sound relocated itself without crossing the space between. One moment behind me, the next to my left, then near the doorway, then closer than should have been possible. My flashlight flickered. I backed toward the wall, pulse frantic, breath quickening. The church interior seemed subtly darker, as if the corners had lost detail. My mind raced through explanations, acoustics, structural resonance, air currents, but none aligned with the sound moving without movement. The breathing deepened, slow, wet, heavy. I gripped my camera like a weapon even though it was useless. I scanned every inch of the room again. Then something stirred at the very edge of the broken slab. A finger, human, pale, thin, pressing against the jagged stone. For a moment, I thought someone really was trapped underneath, until a second finger emerged beside it in perfect synchronization, sliding upward without disturbing the debris. Then a third, then a fourth. All four fingers moved with the same controlled precision, as if attached to a hand but not guided by it. They curled over the lip of the slab, gripping the stone with an unnatural stillness. I forced myself backward, chest hitting the wall behind me. My flashlight shook, beam wavering uncontrollably across the interior. The hand, or whatever resembled a hand, pulled upward. That's when I realized two things at once. One, no arm followed it. The darkness beneath seemed to swallow everything past the wrist. And two, the fingers looked familiar. Not generically human, specifically familiar. My breath left me in a cold rush. The knuckles, the scars, the shape, they were my fingers. My hand, emerging from the void beneath the floor. The breathing around the nave deepened into a thick, guttural exhale. The fingers tightened their grip on the stone. And something began to lift itself out, something shaped like me. For a heartbeat, I couldn't even run. Shock pinned me in place as the fingers, my fingers, tightened around the broken slab. Every detail was identical. The faint white line on the knuckle where I'd once split the skin on a camera mount, the slightly crooked nail on my index finger from a childhood injury, even the faint dusting of hair across the back of the hand. It was mine down to the smallest imperfection. Except it wasn't attached to anything I could see. The hand rose further. A wrist emerged next, pale and slender, but the moment it crossed into the thin shaft of light, its surface shimmered strangely, like my skin but stretched too tight over something that wasn't bone. I stumbled sideways, hitting the pew so hard dust erupted around me. My flashlight beam jittered wildly across the nave. The breathing in the room shifted, growing louder, deeper, like something drawing in a lungful of air from every corner of the church at once. The hand braced against the stone. Then a second hand emerged beside it. Also mine. My pulse thrashed so violently it made my vision blur. The broken slab groaned under the weight of whatever was pulling upward. Beneath the veil of darkness, I heard a slow, wet movement, muscle dragging across stone, flesh sliding through a space that should have been far too narrow. I forced myself to move. My boots slid across gravel and broken plaster. My shoulder collided with the side wall, and I pushed off it, stumbling toward the doorway. Every footstep felt thick, muffled, as if the air resisted movement. The door stood open, unchanged, framed by a sliver of gray daylight. 5 steps. 4. Behind me, something exhaled upward out of the hole. A deep, resonant groan that carried a vibration strong enough to disturb the dust around my feet. 3 steps. 2. Another sound followed, a heavy, fleshy impact, like knees hitting stone. Then fingers scraped across the floor, dragging forward. Not fast, methodical. 1. I reached the threshold and stepped into the clearing, only for my breath to freeze painfully in my chest. The clearing wasn't empty. A figure stood near the far treeline, the same one I'd glimpsed in the forest. Tall, still, human-shaped, but wrong in its proportions. Shoulders too narrow, spine slightly bowed, its head tilted at an angle that suggested listening rather than watching. The distance between us was maybe 50 yards, but the posture was unmistakable. It was waiting. For me. I backed toward the doorway. My instinct told me to run in the opposite direction, anywhere but this clearing, but I knew what had happened the last time I tried to escape. The forest twisted, bent, brought me back here no matter which way I went. Behind me, inside the church, the thing pulled more of itself into the world. The sound of its hands sliding across stone grated against my nerves. I didn't have many choices left. Either face the figure in the clearing, or let my double rise behind me. I made the only decision that felt remotely survivable. Back inside, I ducked into the doorway again and pressed myself against the wall just as something heavy dragged across the nave floor. When my flashlight steadied, the beam landed on 2 pale, familiar hands gripping the stone slab. Then a face began to rise. My face, but distorted, not deformed, unfinished, as though whatever was forming it had only a rough memory of what a human face should look like. The eyes appeared first, opening too slowly, lids stretching as they formed. They were my eyes, but unfocused, staring somewhere beyond me with an expression that didn't match any human emotion I'd ever seen. The rest of the face followed, the cheekbones too sharp, the jaw slightly misaligned, the skin too thin over the bone. The mouth opened and closed in slow, deliberate attempts, like something practicing the mechanics of speaking. Adrian. My name gurgled out of it, not whispered this time, but spoken, each syllable thick and wet, as though learning how to shape air into words. I stumbled backward toward the pews, nearly tripping over my own foot. The creature lifted itself higher, shoulders rising above the edge of the broken slab. Its spine cracked as it straightened, vertebrae snapping into place with small, deliberate pops. Then it stopped moving entirely. The breathing in the room halted. Everything went silent. The creature's head twitched, not toward me but toward the open doorway behind me, like it sensed the presence outside. And then I heard something new, footsteps entering the clearing. Not from the creature at the door, from several directions. Multiple sets, slow, heavy, synchronized. They approached with a kind of unhurried precision that made my stomach drop. The light outside dimmed slightly, as though several figures were gathering at the edge of the forest. I turned toward the doorway. Shapes stood there now. Not one figure. 3. Their silhouettes were nearly identical, tall, stiff, human-shaped shadows. They did not move closer. They simply stood, forming a line across the edge of the clearing. The creature behind me inhaled sharply. The shadows outside responded with a low, collective exhale. They were communicating. The realization froze my blood. This wasn't a random discovery. I hadn't stumbled into an abandoned church. I had walked into something coordinated, something waiting, something that recognized me or tried to. The creature behind me pressed one hand against the floor, preparing to stand fully. I didn't think. I bolted, not toward the clearing, not toward the figures, but toward the back of the nave, where a small, decayed side door hung partly detached from its frame. I slammed into it shoulder first, wood cracking under the impact. The door gave way, collapsing outward into a narrow corridor behind the church I hadn't realized existed. I stumbled into the darkness beyond. The breathing changed. All of it. The thing on the slab. The figures at the clearing. The pressure in the air itself. Everything inhaled at once. Then the corridor behind me slammed shut without anything touching it. And the darkness ahead of me deepened. Waiting, patient, deliberate. For a few seconds, I just stood there in the pitch dark, frozen, my pulse hammering so hard it felt like my ribs might crack from the pressure. The door, if it even was a door, had slammed shut with enough force to shake dust loose from whatever structure surrounded me. I didn't hear any latch, no footsteps, no movement, just impact, then stillness. I reached out blindly, fingers grazing rough stone. The corridor felt narrow, barely wider than the span of my shoulders. The air was cold, but not like the main nave. This cold felt stagnant, as if sealed, old, untouched. Place meant to be hidden, not entered. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then steadied. The beam illuminated a long, straight passage stretching ahead, the ceiling low enough that I had to hunch. The walls were uneven stone, chiseled crudely, maybe centuries ago. Cobwebs hung in thick strands, untouched by movement until now. I took one step forward. The breathing outside, those unnatural, deliberate exhales, became muted behind the sealed door, but not silent. The sound reverberated faintly through the stone, traveling like a heartbeat through bone. I forced myself to move. The corridor narrowed further, and the air grew colder still, but at least I was putting distance between myself and the thing rising from the floor. Every sound felt amplified. My footsteps, my own breathing, the shifting of dust as I brushed against the walls. A faint drip echoed somewhere up ahead, rhythmic and hollow, the only sign of moisture in the otherwise dry air. About 20 feet in, the corridor widened slightly, and my flashlight revealed carvings on the stone. Not decorative, not symbolic. They looked like scratch marks. Long, repeated, desperate gouges clawed into the wall by human fingernails. Some marks had dried blood darkened into the grooves. I felt a tremor ripple beneath my skin, a deep instinct telling me these marks weren't centuries old. I stepped closer, examining one of the gouges. Something about the pattern seemed off, too controlled in some places, too frantic in others, as if several people had made them over time. Some marks were fresher than others. My flashlight beam skimmed the stone, catching tiny flakes of something reddish-brown that hadn't fully dried. My stomach clenched. Someone had clawed this wall recently. The corridor bent slightly to the right, revealing what looked like a small chamber, maybe an access space or a storage alcove. I edged into it slowly, sweeping the flashlight across the floor. Bones. Not many, not arranged, just scattered fragments, small enough that I couldn't immediately identify them. Some looked like they might belong to small animals. Others, not as easily dismissed. A piece of fabric lay caught on a splinter of stone. I crouched and lifted it carefully. Bright orange. Synthetic. A fragment of hiking gear. Fresh. I dropped it as if it burned. My breathing quickened. I moved back into the passage, forcing myself not to panic. The corridor extended deeper, narrowing again. Plunging into darkness, my flashlight struggled to penetrate. Behind me, the breathing shifted. A sound, faint but unmistakable. The sealed door flexed, stone grinding against wood or metal beneath. Not forced open, just tested. As if something pressed its weight against it, gauging its strength. I moved faster. The corridor dipped slightly downward. The incline was subtle but noticeable. The air temperature dropped again, this time enough that each breath hurt. My fingers numbed around the flashlight. A soft sound echoed behind me. Not breathing, not footsteps, a whisper, so faint I thought it was my mind inventing it. Adrian, I nearly dropped the flashlight. The voice wasn't identical to mine, not like the creature on the slab imitating me. This voice was different, higher, strained, human, female. My mind spun. Had someone else been down here? Another explorer? A lost hiker? The historian who gave me the coordinates? Hello, I whispered before I realized I'd broken the rule carved into the altar. Do not speak inside. Here's. The moment the word left my mouth, the corridor reacted. The darkness ahead deepened, as if absorbing the sound. A faint vibration trembled through the stone beneath my boots. Dust drifted from the ceiling in a slow, deliberate fall. Then the whisper came again, closer this time. Adrian, don't. The last word broke, like whoever spoke it was choking or crying. I swallowed, throat painfully dry. Who are you? I whispered quietly, barely shaping the breath. Silence. Then, a soft scuffing sound behind me, no more than 10 feet away. I whipped the flashlight around. The corridor was empty, but the darkness seemed thicker, gathering in shapes my vision couldn't fully assemble. The scuffing came again, light, hesitant, like bare feet on stone trying not to be heard. Help me, the same voice whispered, barely audible. I stepped back, panicked instinct warring with adrenaline. If someone was truly trapped down here, I couldn't abandon them. But if something was using a voice to lure me, the scuffing grew louder, then stopped abruptly. My breath hitched. Slowly, painfully slowly, a hand appeared at the edge of my flashlight's beam, not emerging from below, not from a hole, from around the corner of the corridor I had just walked through. A human hand, slender, trembling, fingers scraped raw and bleeding, dirt caked beneath the nails. One knuckle split open as if slammed repeatedly into stone. My flashlight shook violently. The hand tightened into a fist, scraped once against the wall, leaving a fresh smear of dark red. Then a face leaned around the corner. A woman, her hair tangled, cheeks hollow, eyes wide with terror. She looked directly at me, mouth open in silent pleading. My heart leapt painfully. I stepped forward, but her expression shifted. Not relief, not recognition, horror. She looked past me, into the darkness behind my shoulder. Her mouth opened wider, throat straining, but the scream never came out. Her eyes bulged in pure panic. She pointed. At me. No, behind me. I turned. The passage behind me was filled by a shape that hadn't been there moments ago. Tall, human-shaped, staring. Not the thing from the slab. Not the figures from the clearing. Something new. And it was only inches away. I didn't have time to scream. My body reacted before my mind did. I lurched sideways, slamming my shoulder into the stone wall hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. My flashlight jerked violently, the beam slicing through the corridor in wild arcs. For a split second, I caught a clear glimpse of the thing that had materialized behind me. It wasn't deformed, not monstrous, not shaped like something crawling from the slab. It looked like a man, tall, gaunt, bare feet gray with dust. His clothing was old, so old it looked almost rotted into his skin, the fabric shredded and clinging loosely to a body too thin to be healthy. His face was expressionless. Not blank, just empty, like features arranged without a person behind them. But his eyes, they were wrong. Not hollow, not glowing. Wrong in the quietest, most unsettling way. They didn't move. Not to track me, not to blink, not to react. They simply stared forward, as if the figure hadn't noticed I was there at all. Yet he stood inches from where my face had been. I scrambled back toward the chamber with the claw marks, sliding on loose debris. The woman's face, the hollow-cheeked stranger, still peered around the corner as she watched the thing that had appeared behind me. Her terror hadn't diminished. She mouthed a word silently. Run. I didn't need convincing, but the man, or the thing shaped like one, didn't move as I backed away. His head remained tilted slightly downward, eyes fixed somewhere on the floor. He inhaled once, a slow, hollow breath that sounded nothing like lungs drawing air, more like a bellows pulling through wet cloth. Then he stepped forward. Just one step, a soft, barefooted sound, and all the air in the corridor seemed to compress. My back hit the stone wall so hard it sent dust raining down. The woman vanished around the corner. I didn't hear her run. I didn't hear anything. The corridor swallowed all sound, even the pounding of my own heartbeat. The man-shaped thing took another step. Not fast, not threatening, deliberate, as if following a pattern only it knew. The flashlight flickered, then dimmed. The shadows thickened unnaturally around the edges of the corridor, converging toward the center. I felt something shift beneath my boots. The faintest vibration, subtle but unmistakable. The same vibration I'd felt under the church's floor. I pushed myself along the wall, inching sideways toward the bend in the corridor where the woman had been. Every movement felt like dragging my body through thick, resisting air. The man-thing advanced slowly, eyes unblinking, gaze unfocused but somehow fixed in my direction. When it inhaled again, the temperature dropped so sharply I gasped. My breath came out in a cloud. No, this wasn't just cold. This was a place where heat was being pulled away. I reached the corner and slipped around it, expecting the woman to be waiting. She wasn't. The corridor was empty, silent. Dust hadn't even settled from her movement. It was as if she'd never been there at all. The scuff marks her feet had made were gone too. That realization hit me harder than anything else. Nothing about this place wanted to preserve evidence of the living. Behind me, the man-thing's footsteps grew irregular, uneven, as if its body was relearning how to walk. The stone walls echoed each step with unnaturally sharp resonance. I didn't look back. I ran. The corridor bent sharply right, then straightened, then sloped downward. My flashlight beam jittered, catching carvings on the walls I hadn't noticed before. Symbols etched deeply, systematically, repeating in a pattern I couldn't decipher. Not words, not art, more like warnings. The deeper I went, the more the carvings became frantic, overlapping in layers that suggested panic. And then my boot hit something soft. I stumbled, flashlight swinging downward, a backpack, not torn, not decayed, new, less than a year old at most. I recognized the brand European hiking gear. A water bottle lay beside it, still half full. The metal was cold to the touch, too cold, as if it had been refrigerated, not abandoned underground. My throat tightened. The missing hikers, the woman, anyone who had tried to escape this place. Their belongings hadn't been dragged here. They had been taken from them. My hand brushed something else near the backpack, a small digital recorder. I lifted it. It was cracked down the center, but the power light flickered faintly. My thumb hovered over the play button, but before I could press it, another sound echoed from behind me. Not footsteps, not breathing. A voice, my own. Adrian, not whispered, spoken, came from deeper in the corridor ahead of me, not behind. My stomach twisted painfully. I turned the flashlight forward. The beam illuminated the next 20 feet of the passage, and at the far end, half hidden by shadow, stood a shape. Me. Same clothing, same height, same posture, but the face was wrong. It wasn't distorted like the creature rising from the slab. It wasn't unfinished or stretched thin. It was perfect, too perfect, like someone had sculpted my features with obsessive accuracy. And the eyes, they moved. They tracked me, alive, focused, intentional. He had raised one hand. My hand. The gesture was small, delicate, beckoning. I backed up, step by step, the recorder in one hand, flashlight in the other. The air thickened between us, pressing against my lungs like invisible weight. Behind me, the slow, uneven footsteps of the gaunt man approached again, closing the gap. Ahead of me, my double moved one step closer. Not walking, gliding. My breath fractured, shallow and panicked. I looked down the side of the corridor. Another passage. Narrow, low, almost invisible until the flashlight caught it. I didn't think. I dove into it, scraping my shoulders against the stone. The opening was barely wide enough for me to fit, but adrenaline forced my body through. The recorder clattered against the wall. I grabbed it, shoved it in my jacket, and kept crawling despite the jagged stone tearing at my palms. Behind me, two sounds echoed simultaneously: the heavy, uneven footsteps of the gaunt man entering the narrow bend, and my own voice, calm and steady, calling from the main corridor. "You can't leave." My chest seized, the air thinned, and somewhere in the dark ahead of me, very faint, very far, someone else whispered, "Keep going." The whisper ahead was faint, barely a thread of sound woven through the suffocating darkness. It didn't echo. It didn't even carry. It simply existed, as if spoken directly into my thoughts rather than through air. "Keep going." I didn't recognize the voice. Not the woman's. Not mine. Not any I'd heard in the forest or in the nave. But something in its tone, urgent, frightened, human, pushed me forward even as my arms trembled beneath me. The narrow passage was claustrophobic, barely high enough for my body to slide through without flattening myself against the stone. The air tasted of dust and iron. My flashlight beam kept striking the ceiling, bouncing back into my eyes, forcing me to crawl half-blind. Behind me, movement filled the main corridor, two distinct presences. The gaunt man's uneven, dragging footsteps, and my double smoother, almost frictionless glide, both converging toward the opening I just squeezed into. My heartbeat hammered hard enough that each thud hurt. The stones scraped my shoulders, my knees, my palms, but pain was secondary to the cold blooming across my spine as those sounds drew closer. "Keep going," the voice urged again, this time closer, clearer. I forced myself forward another foot, then another. The passage angled downward, and I nearly slid before catching myself against a protrusion in the wall. The air grew colder still. The footsteps grew louder. Then both presences reached the mouth of the crawlspace. The sound changed instantly. The gaunt man inhaled, a long, wet, hollow breath that sucked warmth from the air. Stone crackled as if frost spread through it. And my double's voice, my own voice, spoke softly, gently, impossibly close. "Adrian, come back." I couldn't look behind me, but the closeness of that voice made my skin crawl. It shouldn't have been able to fit its face anywhere near the opening. The space was too tight for a human head to enter. Yet the voice was right at my back. "I can see you," it whispered. No, it couldn't. But as if to prove otherwise, something brushed the sole of my boot. Not a hand, not fingers, something colder, softer, like breath. I scrambled forward, panic exploding white-hot in my chest. I kicked blindly, and my heel struck stone, not a face or body. But the cold breath followed, washing up my leg. I shoved myself deeper into the narrowing tunnel until the space was so tight I could barely move. My flashlight flickered again, weak, dying. I banged it once against the wall. The beam brightened, then dimmed to a dull cone. Ahead, the tunnel widened slightly, opening into a small void, a hollow space no larger than a closet. I dragged myself into it, gasping. Stone fragments littered the floor, and on the far wall, illuminated by the dim beam, were more scratch marks, fresh ones. Not chaotic, not desperate, intentional. Two words carved deep: "Not you." My breath froze in my throat. The meaning settled like ice in my stomach. Someone had been here. Someone had carved that message for whoever followed. Not you. Not you who? Not me? Or not the thing that looked like me? Behind me, the gaunt man exhaled again. The frost spreading across the stone crackled louder, reverberating through the crawlspace. My breath plumed in front of me. My fingers numbed instantly. And then, something whispered from the hollow space itself, inches from my ear. "This way." I jerked so hard my shoulder cracked against stone. The voice came from the darkness to my right, an even narrower slit I hadn't seen at first. Barely enough for an arm, let alone a person. But then I saw it, a faint glow, soft, flickering. Warm. Not supernatural. Not unnatural. Firelight. Camp lantern. My lungs seized in relief sharp enough to hurt. A human light source. A way out. Someone alive. I pressed my face toward the slit. The stone scraped my cheek, but I didn't care. The glow wavered gently, casting shadows that danced like rippling water. Behind me, a hand entered the crawl space. Not a full hand, only the fingers. Long, thin, gray with dust. The gaunt man was reaching in. I pushed into the slit. The stone tore my jacket. My ribs protested. For a terrifying moment, I didn't fit. Then the voice, urgent, desperate, spoke again. Hurry! I exhaled all the air in my lungs and forced myself sideways. My body slipped through the narrow gap with a rough, skin-scraping jolt. I fell into a much wider tunnel, a real passage, tall enough to crouch in. The lantern sat on the floor 10 feet away, and someone was beside it. The woman, the same hollow-cheeked woman from the corridor. She was trembling violently, hair tangled, lips cracked, but she was there, alive, real, solid. She grabbed the lantern and motioned fiercely for me to follow. No questions, she whispered. Move. I didn't argue. We bolted down the passage, our footsteps echoing sharply. Behind us, the gaunt man's arm scraped furiously against the stone as he tried to force himself through the slit. Then came a second sound. My own voice, calm and steady. You should not have left me. The woman flinched but didn't look back. Don't listen, she hissed. It uses what it takes. What is it? I gasped. She shook her head. Not now. The passage angled upward. The air grew warmer, only slightly, but enough to feel hope prick beneath my ribs. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. The stone underfoot felt more natural, less constructed. We reached a fork. She didn't hesitate, took the right passage and dragged me after her. The sounds behind us grew distant, muffled by the stone. After what felt like 10 minutes of scrambling, climbing, stumbling, the passage opened wide. Fresh air hit my face. Night air. We were outside. The cavern mouth opened onto a slope of rock beneath the forest canopy. The stars above were dim through the branches, but they were there, real, grounding, impossibly comforting. The woman sagged to her knees, sobbing once into her hands before standing again. We have to keep moving, she said. They come out after dark. My voice cracked. Where are we? She turned the lantern dangerously low, her face illuminated only partially. Not far from where you entered, she whispered. It always brings you back. My heart sank. But we can reach the road if we move fast. If it hasn't changed again. Something moved in the trees below us. The gaunt man? My double? Something else? The woman grabbed my hand. Run. We did. Into the dark Romanian forest. Together, terrified, alive. And the church breathed behind us.